Hi, my name is Agnes Callard, and I'm a philosopher. My research for the past few years has been on aspiration, and I just finished a book called Aspiration. So, um, the word aspiration means aiming at a goal that you don't fully grasp. And the process that I want to describe in my book is the process of trying to become better, trying to become a better person in some way that is new to you. So, one way to get a grip on it is to think about the fact that there are many things that you currently care about. People that you currently care about, political ideals that you care about, hobbies, um, maybe religions and religious practices that you care about. And at least some of those you didn't care about, say, 5 or 10 or 20 years ago, right? They just weren't on your radar. So, how did that change happen? How did you come to be a person who cared passionately about and was deeply invested in the things that you're invested in now? Um, and some of that story, the story of how you came to be the person that you are, is going to make reference to accidents, right? To you were in the right place at the right time. You met a certain person. You just sort of stumbled on something that, if the conditions hadn't been just right, you wouldn't have stumbled upon. But generally, that part of the story is the beginning of the story. That's not the whole story, right? It's not as though at some one fortuitous moment you were just transformed, right? Just suddenly went from being someone who didn't care at all about something to becoming someone for whom that was one of the central concerns of their life. It doesn't happen in a moment. And so even if there are these sort of accidental factors, these things just happen that facilitate the transformation, generally the transformation takes time, and it involves your doing things, right? It involves doing things for the goal of, for the sake of becoming the person that you end up, right? For at least in some cases, right? At least in some cases, the reason why you ended up caring about certain things is that you actually took some pains to become the kind of person who cares about those things. Or at any rate, that's at least part of the story in at least some of the cases. Now, what I'm saying might sound obvious. It might just sound clear. Of course, we have a hand in the people that we become, but on a lot of philosophical theories, that's paradoxical. It's hard to understand how that could be. So let me try to lay out the paradox for you. It looks like if you're going to choose to become someone, or take pains to become someone, or work to become someone, right? Well, then you either have to already see some benefit in becoming that kind of person. It has to already be in some way apparent to you that that's a good way to be, or you don't. Right? Now, if you do, well, then it looks like you're already the sort of person who appreciates the relevant thing, right? And so, in effect, you're already transformed. You had to be transformed in order to get started. Suppose you don't appreciate it, right? Well, then why do you take these pains? Maybe you just do it on a whim, or sort of randomly, or by accident, or something, right? But then we're not really talking about a process that is an expression of who you really are, right? If this change in you is one that that wasn't guided in any sense by your grasp of the value of ending up the kind of person that you ended up, then it doesn't look like something you did. It doesn't look like something you're responsible for. It doesn't look like a product of your agency. And so what I try to do in the book is sort of navigate that paradox. And I do it by saying that it's possible to have a kind of partial or incomplete grip on a value. So you can grasp some value, like say I'm training to become a philosopher, as I once was. And, I see value in doing philosophical things, reading philosophy books, writing philosophy papers, talking to other people about philosophy. But I also, I'm very unsure in my footing. I don't really know what I'm doing when I'm doing any of those things. I don't know whether I'm doing it right. I remember wondering whether my teachers all had special copies of the texts of Plato and Aristotle with, the important sentence underlined. And that's how they knew which sentences to quote out, because I couldn't tell which were going to be the important ones, right? So I didn't know what I was doing. I didn't know what was good about the thing I was doing, but I also knew, I didn't totally not know. I wasn't just completely blind, but I didn't have the kind of grasp that, say, my teachers did. So it's that intermediate condition that I want to describe, and more specifically, what I want to describe is the way in which when you're in that intermediate condition, you know you're in it, and you know you're in a condition that needs to change, right? It's not a stable medium. It's a kind of dynamic position where you can see that your own grasp of the value is imperfect or incomplete. One of the things you're trying to do is to grasp it better. You're trying to learn. And that's a thing people can do, right? So that's really what my book argues. This thing is possible. It's real. It's a thing people can do. People can try to learn value. They can use a kind of dim or incomplete grasp of what's good about something to kind of pull themselves up to a better or more secure grasp that they'll have once that thing is really a central fixture of their lives. Now, you might ask, okay, what's at stake here, right? Why is it important that we acknowledge that this is a thing that really can happen? What is the difference between a view like mine, on which the thing I've described is a real thing, and a view where you might be more skeptical and you might say, look, either you grasp the value and then, you can be motivated by it, or you don't, and then you can't, right? The skeptic might think, no, maybe all the work is done by your environment. All the work is done by other people kind of exposing you to things. You don't do any of the work yourself, right? So I'm the non-skeptic. I'm the realist about aspiration. I think it's a real thing. It's a real condition. And you might want to know, why does it matter whether you're like me or like the skeptic? So in my book, I try to give you a couple of ways of thinking about why it matters. And some of them are just on directly philosophical grounds. It helps you solve a bunch of different kinds of puzzles in philosophy, in decision theory, in theory of moral responsibility, and in what's called moral psychology, or the philosophy of internal conflict. But I want to give you guys a different way of thinking about the payoff, okay? And it's one that comes out in actually a paper that it's not part of the book, but it's a paper that I wrote after I wrote the book as a kind of upshot. And what I do in the paper is I try to apply this kind of aspiration framework to a particular case, namely the case of liberal education, right? The kind of education that I provide my undergraduates at the University of Chicago. And what I try to do is to show that if you're a skeptic about aspiration, it looks like you have two choices as to how you should think about what is going on between me and my students here at the University of Chicago. Here's your first choice. I'll call it the paternal model. So you might see me as kind of a parental figure to my students. They don't know the value of reading Plato and Aristotle, studying philosophy. They come in here not really having done those things. And it's my job to kind of impart those values to them, to, so to speak, make them value those things. They may not like it. They may not come here wanting to do any of those things. But I'm going to kind of transfer those values to them, or I'm going to I'm going to be the one who knows what's good for them. That might be the way to think about it. I know that it's good for them to learn those things, even though they can't possibly know because they don't know them yet. They don't know what's good about those things, right? So I'm like their parent and I say, look, eat it because it's good for you. You may not see that it's good for you, but I do. Just trust me. That's one model. Here's another model. My students are like consumers, right? They're like people at the supermarket, right? And they have their shopping list, and they're walking around. Right? Students do shop for classes. We have a shopping period, right? We talk in this way, and they look at my class and they say, Introduction to Ancient Philosophy. Is ancient philosophy something that I want? Is it something that I value? Is it going to satisfy my desires, my needs, my preferences? And if they decide that it does, then they say, okay, I'll take that class. And they're in charge. They're in charge of what they get out of my class. They're in charge of their own acquisition of value. Both of these models are problematic. The parental one is problematic because it's disrespectful. My students are adults. I'm not their parent. I don't know better than them what kind of a life is good for them and what kinds of values are the values that they ought to pursue. But my students also are not what you might call informed consumers, right? They don't have the shopping list. They don't know what they want because they don't know whether they want philosophy because you can't know whether you want philosophy until you've tried it because it's a new thing. It's a new kind of value that they haven't, it's not fungible with the things they've already come to value, right? Its value is of a different kind and it can't be cashed out in the coin of many other values anyway, right? Maybe some of them have done philosophy in high school, but for many of them, the experience of taking a class in philosophy is the experience of really coming into contact with something new and learning to value something new, not learning to satisfy desires or needs they already had. Okay, so here's the problem. Are we forced? Do we have to think about liberal education as either wise parental teachers inculcating students with value, or, on the other hand, savvy students making sure they get the most of the money that they or their parents put into their education by choosing the courses that are right for them? I think both those models are wrong. I think there's got to be an alternative. If there's no alternative, then what I'm doing in my classroom doesn't make any sense to me. Right? So, and I hope that if you have had the benefit of a liberal education, then you'll see that neither of those two choices really make sense of what happened to you, right, in your education. As students, if I think back on my time as a student, I just think, no, it's not right to think of myself as a consumer, but I wasn't a child either. Neither of those seem right. Okay, so what I offer you is an alternative, that there's a new way of thinking about what was going on when you were a student, what is going on for my students now. What's going on with them is that they're aspirants. They're people who are trying to learn something. It's not that they already have the relevant values, right? It's not that they're just trying to satisfy the desires they already have, but it's also not right to think that what's going on with them is that they are dependent on me to kind of guide them in the realm of value because they're totally blind. They're guiding themselves. They're doing it. They're doing the work. They're doing the learning. I'm just there to help, right? But it's really their agency that's at stake in their coming to learn and appreciate the value of philosophy. That's what the theory of aspiration gives you. It gives you a way of making sense of a bunch of stuff that seems to happen to us and seems to be important in our lives, and where we might be tempted, I think really as a result of the product of bad philosophical theories that all of us, not only philosophers, but all of us in the whole world have kind of absorbed, we might be tempted to to sort of simplify the situation using fewer categories than we need, and thereby kind of end up with an impoverished conception of our own agency. So what the import of my research is to try to fight against that.